live stream audio check 321. Three, two, one, three, two, one, three, two, one.
Evening all. Welcome to the meeting of the Governance and Audit Committee on Tuesday the 26th of November 2024. My name's Chris Pearson. I am Councillor for Beerchurch and I chair these meetings. In the event of an emergency and there are no practice alarms planned for this evening, please evacuate the Town Hall by going down the main staircase or the back staircase to the High Street and then congregating in the car park behind the Town Hall in St Rumwell Street. This meeting is being held in the Grand Jury Room at the Town Hall and is also being broadcast live on the Council's YouTube channel. That recording will be available for as long as YouTube is available, I suppose, for you to peruse at your leisure after the meeting. Members of the committee are reminded that they can use electronic devices to access meeting papers. Visitors are welcome to use mobile phones and other devices, including cameras, but I would just ask that you please use them discreetly and set all of your electronic devices to silent, bearing in mind that the Mayor will happily take a fine from any member whose device makes a noise during the course of the meeting. There are toilets on every floor in the building and an induction loop in this room for anyone who requires it. We will have a short break around 7:30 should the meeting be going on past that. And now I will just ask everyone starting on my left to introduce themselves, and Richard, over to you please.
Richard Block, Chief Operating Officer.
Councillor Paul Smith, St Anne's and St John's Ward.
Sam McLean, Newtown and Christchurch.
Dennis Willits, Lexington and Grayswick Ward.
William Summocks, Royal North Ward.
And Councillor Paul Dundas, Tiptree Ward.
Philip Sullivan, Chief Executive of Colchester Borough Homes.
Jeff Beale, Strategic Housing and Assurance Manager.
Councillor Sean Kelly, Wivenhoe.
Matthew Evans, Democratic Services Officer.
Thank you. So we've one substitution this evening, and that's Councillor Willits is substituting for Councillor Sarah Naylor. Item 3, urgent items. I'm not aware of any. No. Declarations of interest. Item 4. Does anybody have any interest they wish to declare before we begin the... Not seeing any hands up, so we'll take that as a no. Have your say. We have no members of the public in attendance this evening and no councillors who are not members of the committee, so there are no have your says. So that leads us directly into item 6. As the shareholder committee, we're required to oversee the performance of Colchester Borough Homes, and tonight we have the performance for Q2 24-25. I'm going to hand over to you, Mr. Sullivan, to introduce, please.
Thank you very much, Chair. This is the Q2 Landlord Report being presented to committee in its capacity as the Council's Landlord Committee. The updates included in the report are highlighted in section 1.3. If I can ask Jeff to highlight the key points linked to the 24-25 tenant satisfaction measures performance, and then I'll highlight some other key points from the report, Chair. Thank you.
Thank you, Philip. Just as a reminder for the committee, the tenant satisfaction measures are intended to be a tool to allow tenants to scrutinise their landlord's performance, give insights to landlords on where they might look to improve their services, and provide a source of intelligence to the regulator on how far landlords are meeting the outcomes of the new consumer standards. 2024-25 is the second year of the tenant satisfaction survey results, and the previously reported Year 1 survey results were published nationally today by the regulator. Table 5.1.2 details the results of the survey for this year, along with, for comparison, the results of last year and the percentage change in the results and the median local authority result. As you can see from the table, the results are positive and encouraging. Overall satisfaction has improved and is now above the national benchmark, and most other ratings have improved significantly since last year, including the scores for repairs and property maintenance. The results will be published to tenants in their winter edition of Housing News and Views, following which consultation with tenants on the results will take place and an action plan will be developed for the year. The data will be submitted to the regulator in the prescribed format in April 2025, and we start again in summer 2025 with year 3 of the survey. There will be a full report made available to all and published on the website. Thank you.
Thank you, Jeff. If I can just continue with some highlights from the remainder of the report, Chair, please. As indicated in 5.2.1, CBH's Operations and Performance Committee has now reviewed Q2 performance and is able to provide assurance to this committee that, in line with Appendix 1, year-to-date performance is strong, with the specific points to highlight covered in this report for committee, particularly in respect of asbestos and electrical safety and voids. In terms of voids, committee will see that to improve performance, weekly tenancy and liaison meetings have been introduced, and a new staff member is now in place and dedicated to carrying out end of tenancy inspections. If I can move on to the mock inspection action plan, in 5.4, committee is being asked to note the inspection action plan, that good progress is being made already in implementing the action, and that assurance will be provided to this committee in Q1 next year, 25-26, that the action plan has been successfully implemented, with any exceptions being highlighted. In 5.5, the terms of reference for this committee and the full council have been updated to reflect the landlord function of the committee. And then in terms of complaints, the complaints update in section 5.6 includes some of the highlights from the Ombudsman's 23-24 annual complaint review. The committee will see that the number of orders increased by more than threefold in that year to over 21,000 across the country, and that there were more than 8,600 findings of maladministration. Whilst our aim is always to deliver high services at CBH, the 23-24 report highlights the more active Ombudsman service, which is reflected in the high volume of CBH cases as well, Chair, as reported in the update. Additional regulatory assurance from CBH is provided in 5.8 of the report, and committee will also see that the regulator's sector risk review is being considered in detail by the CBH board in December, and CBH's strategic risk map will be updated to reflect any evolving or new risks identified. If I can pause there, Chair, and open up for any questions. Thank you.
Thank you, Philip. Thank you, Graham. Jeff, sorry. Questions, comments, members? Councillor Sonics.
Yes, I note that the remit of this committee has been changed to so we are officially the landlord social housing role. So I guess we've managed to pick up the responsibility for the HRA, which I've been whinging about not having any. Suddenly we are the governance for the HRA responsibility. Is that me or someone else? Oh, right. So I guess we are effectively acting like the board of the HRA, which is quite a responsibility. So we need to sort of reflect on that a little bit and make sure we're doing it properly in the absence of anything else. We have found that we are filling a huge, great gap.
All right, thank you. I'm not certain that that's an accurate reflection of the Constitution, Councillor Sonics, but I take your point that we do need to, as the Governance and Audit Committee, we do need to be reviewing what's happening with HRA, and we do get those reports. Mr. Block, do you want to just come in and clarify?
I'd concur. I think, you know, it's clear that we have an executive model where Cabinet are responsible for oversight of the HRA and then reporting up to full council on that progress. Governance and audit perform a scrutiny function in the same way the scrutiny panel do.
Thank you. So certainly we should inspect and digest and comment in detail on what we hear and what we see around HRA, but ultimately it's not our responsibility to set HRA, but you know, certainly we can remark on whether or not we think it's going in the right direction. Councillor Sunnucks.
Yes, I'm quite pleased to hear that, because, you know, I don't want the expectations to be up there and our performance to be down there on this. What worries me is that we're going to, in such detail on the operational side, that people might think that we're actually scrutinising the financial side, which is, in my view, all over the place. And so we should be highlighting very clearly to Cabinet that, I can't remember whether we've done it yet, but that governance vacuum over our biggest, the biggest asset on our balance sheet by far.
Okay, thank you. Remark noted, and certainly we've discussed this on a number of occasions over the last 18 months. Councillor Smith.
Thank you. Yes, I would like to look at the figures that you put forward, the performance figures, and note the general conclusions that things seem to be going in a very positive direction. Virtually all the indicators are improving, and the vast majority of indicators down there are above the average. And that, I think, is a very commendable position. It hasn't always been the case, and there has been a significant improvement. And certainly as a ward councillor, it's something that I've noticed over the past 12 months of increased responsiveness, particularly in the repairs area. And so I would like to congratulate you and the team for all the work that you've put in achieving that. And I think that's a very commendable performance, and I'm sure other councillors have had the similar experiences in their ward. Can I also go on to the mock inspection? Because I think that's something that's very important. We're seeing quite a lot of diversity in the findings that the inspectors are coming out with now. Can you give us some feelings as to how you think the mock inspection went and areas that we need to concentrate on and improve on for the final version, whenever that comes?
Thank you. Mr. Sullivan.
Thank you very much, Councillor Smith. In terms of how the mock inspection went, overall it was very positive, and the feedback that was provided by the Savills consultants in the feedback session with representatives from the council and CBH is that they would pitch us at a high C2, which is consumer standard 2, borderline C1, with C1 being the top consumer grade. It's C1 to C4, they would pitch us towards the top of a C2, borderline C1. In terms of opportunities for improvement to get us over the line to a C1, a couple of things. Knowing more about our customers, we know a lot, but knowing more and using that data to really make a difference to service is one key area. The other is that whilst they were satisfied that we were doing everything, that they wanted to see more evidence, more assurance of it. And so we are, one of the many actions that we're taking and have put in place steps already, is we're going to be commissioning more audits next year. So whilst we're doing it, whilst we're reporting on it, it's just getting that third-party assurance. That's the icing on the cake that will get us over the line. They're the sorts of indications that Savills gave us to get us closer to that C1 or comfortably into the C1.
Thank you. Yeah, I would echo Councillor Smith's remarks about the tenant satisfaction measures. It's pleasing to see those are, I think when I looked at it, every one was above the national average. You may have spotted one that I didn't. and that's positive to see. On the slightly negative side, it was the asbestos and the electrical safety. Yes, very good results in terms of both being in the 99 percentile, but I, for one, wouldn't want to be living in the house or two where there is still asbestos or there are electrical concerns, because I know when I moved into my current home, first thing we did was rip the electrics out, and they were old rubber wiring in parts bare, so I know how important it is to have the electricals in a safe state. But that said, I think there's some really good stuff in here. Jeff, did you want to come back to that?
Yeah, just to give you some assurance that those ones that haven't been done, it's the inspection that hasn't been done, so there might not be those issues in there, but Colchester Borough Homes are very aware of those addresses and are trying to get the access into those properties to make sure that they are done and are up to date.
Thank you, that's very reassuring. And the only other thing that I would have picked up at this stage was just in 5.25 around voids. It's improving, but we know the situation with homelessness in Colchester and how dire it's been for the last 18 months. So anything that can be done to reduce that from 32 days down to that 28-day target or even better, I think we would much appreciate. Councillor Kelly.
2 points related. The first one, and this I may have missed this in the past, but I'm pleased to see that we've now got historic data presented next to current data, so we can get an idea of the rate of change. And I think that's very good to be able to see that. And as I say, I may have missed it previously, but I'm noting it particularly here. And secondly, in relation to the data, particularly the satisfaction survey data, I think it would be useful if, in addition to historic data, you could also present the sample size as well, because as it stands, seeing the percentages in isolation, it's difficult for me to understand the significance of that percentage in relation to, say, the national average, if the sample taken here was 3 and the national average sample was 3,000, for example, in that context. So if you were able to supply, not necessarily all, but some sample sizes for some of these things, and like the coloured graph, like the pie charty ones that are a bit further on page 19, those as well, which again, I note that they've got the quarterly change as well, which is really good. But I think it would be really nice if there were some sample sizes on those, as well as on the tables, the tabulated data that we were looking at earlier on in 5.1.2, because I think that would, certainly I would find that helpful, and I think other people might as well. Thank you.
Thank you. Philip? Yeah.
If perhaps I can start and then bring Jeff in. I think it's a really important point, and there's several aspects of the sample size of the tenant satisfaction measures that I'll pick up on. Jeff will probably be able to share some numbers, but the first is I can give you assurance that it's statistically accurate. Jeff will provide more detail on that. Secondly, it's conducted by an external data collection organisation, so it's robust, it's third party, but also we had an internal audit carried out last year to make sure that it complied with the technical requirements of the regulator in terms of the methodology, and we had substantial assurance, the top level of assurance, no issues at all identified. The final thing is that the method of collection this year was the same as last year. There is discussion in the sector that some have changed the way they collect the data because there are certain ways, for example in person as opposed to online, that you will get a different result, and so they have sought to collect in a different way for that purpose, or arguably for that purpose, although the regulator is alert to that. We've used a consistent methodology over the 2 years, but perhaps Jeff can come in terms of numbers.
Thanks, Philip. I don't think I've got the actual numbers to hand, but off the top of my head, I think the sample size was about 2,000, and we sent paper surveys out to those 2,000, and we got 900 responses. So that gave us a statistically satisfactory survey. In terms of the benchmarking that you noticed, it was only the last meeting that it appeared first time, so you haven't missed anything previously.
Thank you. So, yeah, with 900 responses, what do we look at? It's just short of 6,000 homes, so it's not a bad return rate, I suppose. And if we sent 2,000 out, that means that we sent 1 in 3 surveys out. So I think statistically we can say that's a pretty good rate of return, and also robust in terms of statistical analysis of what's going on. I've got Councillor Dundas and then Councillor Willett.
Thank you, Chair. Yes, us politicians obsess about national opinion polls on only about 900, so we can probably take that as a reasonable sample. Just very quickly, just to pick up on the figure for satisfaction with repairs, which is 87.27%. The 13-odd% who aren't satisfied, my guess is that's primarily around time rather than dissatisfaction with quality of repairs. And also, I guess this is subjective really, are you reasonably happy with the time we're taking to do repairs? In other words, the people who aren't happy, do you feel that perhaps they are being perhaps slightly unreasonable in their expectations? Because let's face it, if we want anything fixed ourselves, we want it done within the hour, but the reality is it's not physically possible to often do that. Or do you feel that perhaps there are a few areas which we're not getting the repairs done? You know, I guess that's a slightly subjective question, but I think you get my meaning.
Thank you. I mean, you're absolutely right. Time is sometimes an issue for dissatisfaction with repairs. Often, to be frank, it's around communication breakdown. And sometimes it's about quality. So it is a range of factors. Broadly speaking, because we have different repair timescale categories, we're able to flex, you know, if it's a genuine emergency. I think sometimes what is a genuine emergency, there's a difference in perception, and so that can lead to dissatisfaction. I think that's an important point. But broadly speaking, I think we've got the repairs categories and timescales okay, I would say broadly speaking, and they've been relatively recently updated to make sure of that. What I'd also say though is that we need to continuously look at ways to improve the repair service. One of the points of feedback we had around communication from customers was that particularly when we had complex repairs or a number of repairs coming in from one household, sometimes there were gaps in communication. So we introduced a new approach probably about 6 months ago, where one of the repairs supervisors would take ownership of all of the repairs and lead on that communication with the customer. So I'm optimistic that we're seeing the right movement in terms of satisfaction, but we need to keep finding those opportunities by listening to our customers.
Okay, thank you. Councillor Willett.
Chairman, I'm an occasional visitor, so if my question has been argued or answered ad nauseam, just tell me to shut up and I will obey your command instantly.
That's a new one, Councillor Willett, but I'm pleased to note that you've acknowledged that. Carry on.
Comments are on the tenants' satisfaction measures. What surprised me reading through them was that there was not a satisfaction measure of whether their tenancy was, in their opinion, good value for money. And I would have thought that was one of the sort of principal issues, particularly given that on page 15 we read that there is a strategic risk of failure to deliver against customers' expectation. And I don't really know what the expectation is on the level of rents, but I would have thought that that would have been a pretty important one, but it may be that that's been ruled out by some other greater authority than you, Chairman. My second point on the tenant satisfaction measure was that I had difficulty comprehending just how TP10 and TP11 work in a mixed environment. If I consider the social housing in my ward, and there are 3 main areas of it. In Fiddler's Folly, over 70% of the original municipal housing properties have been sold off, so we're only dealing with a very small part of it. In Bratbrook Cottages, of the 65 original blocks, only 9 of them are still in ownership. given that of those 9, they are flats, and there may be multi-occupancy in one building. And in Hardings Close, where Councillor Smith kindly built 4 additional houses, it still means that the number of municipal houses is less than 50%. So when it comes to satisfaction that the landlord keeps communal areas clean and well maintained, I find it difficult to understand precisely what is a communal area in a block of mixed tenancy and privately owned. Who is responsible? And it goes back to Councillor Sunnock's point earlier on. You know, if there's muck in the alleyway, is it muck from the private sector owners, so it should be cleaned by neighbourhood services from the general rate fund, or is it housing revenue muck which should be cleaned by the CBH team? So I just have difficulty understanding how that is coordinated to ensure that we have a really first-class performance on TP10, and likewise on TP11. Making a positive contribution to the neighbourhood. Well, in the case of Bradbrook Cottages, we can certainly have CBH make a very positive contribution to the neighbourhood, but it's actually being experienced mainly by the owner-occupiers, not by the tenants, although it may well be that CBH can obtain a magnificent performance report if they send the pro forma round to the owner-occupiers as well. But it just seemed a bit of a muddle to my understanding. Now, there may be a clear explanation of how it's done and how we tease out what are the real values that we need to report to the regulator. But I just wondered whether there was easy clarification that I could understand on this matter. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you, Councillor Willits. I'm sure that Philip and Jeff can clarify the model for you.
Thank you, Councillor. I'll perhaps make a start and then perhaps Jeff will come in. In terms of the value for money, it's not one of the questions. These are prescribed by the regulator. They're prescribed in terms of the questions to be asked and the methodology for asking them, the reason being that they're then comparable across the country for all social landlords. I take your point, it's an important question, but it's not reported here for that reason. In terms of TP 10 and 11, a very appropriate question because it is confusing. The reason being that it's not explicit about the landlord, the managing agent, and it does pick up for us on Essex County Council because they will own some of the verges, as well as the City Council. It will pick up other landlords. So other housing associations that operate in that neighbourhood as well as the council. It will pick up where it's privately rented accommodation or right to buy, sold right to buy. This incorporates all of that. What I would say from a landlord and a regulatory point of view, in the new consumer standards, the regulator has been explicit to housing associations that they should be contributing positively to the neighbourhood. So there's some emphasis that's been brought in to regulate them on that. But beyond that, it's about CBH and colleagues working in partnership with Essex County Council and other landlords and other organisations that operate locally. But the council could be performing really, really well and being let down by other parties, and that be reflected in the satisfaction measures. So I think you're absolutely right in terms of your question, and it's not clear cut. It is involving everyone in that neighbourhood.
Just to add as well, all the questions that we have to ask are prescribed by the regulator. So in regards to those questions 9 and 10, I can send you the definitions, and that will provide the clarity, I think, around what the question is actually asking. And then in terms of the results as well, the full report will have all of those explanations into it, and for councillors as well, the results are broken down by tenants' age groups and by tenant wards as well. So you'll be able to see the results for your own ward area as well.
Thank you. And I would hope that if any councillor was concerned about tenant satisfaction in their ward, in a particular group of homes, that we could ask you to actually survey that small group of residents and report back to us. Because I note in the report that the query that I'd asked for previously about local ward councillors being reported to where the ombudsman had been involved, that's been agreed and approved, and that's good to see. So I know as a ward councillor it's important to have an understanding of how CBH tenants are feeling about the landlord, because ultimately we have responsibility for the landlord. And are you happy with those? That's helped you to clarify the model, Councillor Willett?
Yes, it just seemed a bit unfair that our performance rating could be wrecked by some inconsiderate owner-occupiers who lived adjacent to our properties.
Okay. Have I missed anyone? I think, no. The only thing that I wanted to point out was in Appendix 3, obviously it's got the governance and executive route to regulatory assurance, shows our place in the hierarchy. And I just wanted to point out that the chair of the board was intending to be here, but due to unforeseen circumstances hasn't been able to. So we pass on our best wishes, and thank you both of you for attending this evening. We're in the recommended decisions. Obviously it's our responsibility to look at, I know it's saying note, but I think we need to be a bit more proactive than just noting. I think we've made some points about what we see in the report, the Q2 report, what we'd like to see clarified in future reports, what we've found helpful and useful in terms of how CBH is operating over the first 2 quarters of the year, and any assurance that committee members wish to obtain. I think we've had that. So all happy with that? Yep, thank you. Right, thank you, Mr. Beales, thank you, Mr. Sullivan, for your attendance and contribution this evening. So that takes us on to 7. It's all right, we're slightly thrown because I had 6 little 1 on the end. I was thinking, where's 6 little 2 gone? But we don't have a 6 little 2. So, item 7 is the Q2 budget monitoring report. Chris Hartgrove, you're going to join us? Evening and welcome, Chris.
Good evening, members. I apologise for my late arrival. I got caught in traffic between Epping and Colchester. So on to item 7 on the agenda then, which is the Q2 budget monitoring report for 24-25. It appears on pages 31 to 55 of your document pack this evening and sets out the Q2 position for 24-25. In other words, the forecast outturn for this, the 24-25 financial year, based on available information as of the 30th of September 2024. The report covers the revenue and capital positions for both the General Fund and the Housing Revenue Account, as well as their respective funding positions. Just to remind the committee of the important change in presentation that this financial year, so with effect from 24-25, indeed as revealed in Q1, the table presented in paragraph 6.1 on page 33 now comprises just 3 columns and significantly greater clarity than was than previous financial years. It reflects the underlying change in accounting practice, which now means that the budget is fixed by the council back in February 2024 in this case, and does not change for the duration of the financial year, which will hopefully aid the scrutiny process. To the detail then, unfortunately financially it's not been a good first half to the financial year for the council. Paragraphs 6.1 and 6.2, including appendices A and B, set out several significant financial pressures, and once again homelessness and temporary accommodation costs as the headline, with a forecast overspend of 1.142 million as at the Q2 stage, individually being the largest item behind a gross overspend of 2.587 million on service budgets. Members should note that the anticipated savings from the recently adopted Beyond the Box student accommodation initiative are not reflected in this forecast. The projected impact will be reflected in the Q3 report to the committee, so that's being looked at the moment. There's also a forecast overspend of 510,000 on place and prosperity, with two notable pressures behind the projected service overspend. Firstly, a savings target of 285,000 in 24-25 which was aimed at offsetting the residual costs of the local plan, not now expected to be achieved, and the target actually formed part of several roll forward budget requests that were not sanctioned, and probably worth stressing that that was in the context of a significant budget overspend that we had to deal with at the end of 23-24, and as part of the closure of the financial year. And secondly, there's a forecast shortfall of 270,000 on income from planning applications. Neighbourhood services with an underlying pressure of 445,000 on income from garden waste collections is another notable factor, as reported in Q1. This is due to the necessary accounting treatment of membership subscriptions paid in 23-24, which are required to be credited in full in that year to that year, unlike the service charge, which is matched to the service provided. Whilst paragraphs 6.1 and 6.2 are negative for the most part, I think it's fair to say, focusing on a range of cost pressures, paragraph 6.2 does end on a high, on a positive note, with a significant underspend of 1.630 million now forecast on financing costs. This significantly offsets the overspend on service budgets, resulting in net year-end overspend forecast of 957,000. This is an improved position compared to Q1, where the net outturn of 2.048 million was forecast. The underspend on capital financing costs is mainly driven by a combination of lower than anticipated net interest payable and reduced MRP charges, reflecting updated timing expectations on the delivery of a range of general fund capital schemes. The position is made more pronounced by the receipt of significant external grant funding prior to its application on eligible capital schemes. So this reduces the short-term external borrowing requirements. The table in paragraph 6.3 shows that funding assumptions are mostly on track at the Q2 stage, although a surplus of 245,000 is anticipated from the council tax sharing agreement, and most notably, of course, if the forecast overspend emerges as projected, a contribution from the general fund reserve of 200,000 will be required, as opposed to the assumed contribution to the reserve of 512,000 assumed in the budget. As presented in the table in paragraph 7.3, this would leave a balance of 6.717 million in the general fund unallocated reserve, a reduction of course, but nevertheless still leaving a balance comfortably above the adopted minimum contingency of 3 million. The HRA forecast is presented in section 8 of the report, beginning on page 38. It shows a broadly positive first half to the financial year, with additional income of 1.692 million anticipated. With rental incomes performing strongly, as 24-25 is a 53-week rent year, and an additional 36 units have now been added at Greenstead in March 2024 after the budget was set. So that has boosted the forecast outturn. In addition, RTB sales are also lower than usual, retaining rent generating stock for longer than was anticipated in the budget. The HRA balance of 4.380 million is forecast to remain unchanged, which is well above the £1.6 million minimum assumed in the current HRA business plan. To briefly conclude then, the capital programme forecast is presented in section 9 and section 9 for the general fund, section 10 for the HRA. Spending on both general fund and HRA capital has been subdued again in Q2, with notable slippage on levelling up schemes such as St Botolph's roundabout, with an impact of 10.289 million, which is the single largest element in the general fund programme, and that's driving an overall forecast underspend of 44.185 million, as presented in the table in paragraph 9.2 on page 40. Happy to take any questions.
Thank you, Mr. Hartgrove. I think my first point, and one that I'd like us to pass on to Cabinet, is the ongoing time lag of capital expenditure, and I know we've raised concerns about that previously. So I hope that when we finish, that everyone will be able to support that. And I noticed that the leader of the council's phone went off during your report, Mr. Hartgrove. So we will ensure that the mayor is alerted. Right, I did see some hands up. So I've got Councillor Dundas and Councillor Smith.
Thank you, Chair. Yes, I don't know if the phone issue has solved the budget or not, but I've got a couple of questions on the general fund and then on the capital fund. I'll try and separate, or the capital programme, try and separate them out. But firstly, just a general comment, and in fact, Chair, you alluded to it. The 1.63 million reduction in financing which is mainly interest costs and MRP. There's a certain sense of irony there, because that has saved our bacon to a certain extent in terms of balancing this. But our bacon has kind of been saved by our failure to deliver our capital programme. So that rather begs the question we have to ask ourselves: is our current capital programme affordable? If we're only managing to bring our deficit down to a reasonable level because we failed to deliver our capital projects, you know, it's a valid question, I think, to be asked. On specific questions, we know about the infamous Turnstone project. I don't want to get into specifics about that, but we do know that there was an income figure in the original budget passed in February for that, which is unlikely to materialise. So in Appendix A, where we have the forecast outturn for the end of this year, and bearing in mind we now know some facts around that, we certainly know that figures will be different. Is that incorporated into that anywhere? If so, where? And if it's not, then we have to be realistic that that outturn is probably not going to materialise. There's going to be a difference. That's my first question. On the modern city services, I know you mentioned the accounting treatment of the garden waste income. I thought we'd corrected all of that in the February budget, but clearly not. So a little bit of further explanation would be appreciated. Also, and it's difficult to talk about this, but I guess we're still using the same pay settlement assumption we used back in February on the outturn, but confirmation that we are would be good. On the capital programme, there's mention, and I appreciate actually Mr. Hartgrove doesn't run the capital programme, so I'm probably being a bit unfair with some of these questions. Like, although he seems to know things which he probably isn't obliged to know because he's very good. We have the CNG enabling works. Now, as of September the 30th, it's showing that nothing has been spent, but we're predicting to spend 3 million by March. We're now in December, so I guess my first question would be, have we started? But my main question is the rationale for putting that in the budget this year. If we go back to the Cabinet papers from last January, was that we had to get a slot with National Highways, and the date mentioned was summer 2024. And the argument made at the time was, if we don't get it done by summer 2024, we're going to lose our slot, and it might be another 5 years, and that's why it was urgently approved. So my question is, where are we with that? Because it's no longer summer, last time I looked. And that would beg the question, we've either missed our slot or the report was wrong. So they can't, there's two things there around that. A little one on there, Stanway Toucan Crossing, 200,000. Now, I remember this back in about 2019 being discussed. It's saying that we think we're going to get some money out the door. It'd be interesting to know what happens there. And also, we've still got £1 million in for the Moot Hall, with £1 million outturn being shown at the end of the year. Is that a realistic figure? Would be my question. I think I'll leave it there because I've asked enough questions. But
right, thank you. I think we'll forgive Chris, and I'm going to turn to Richard as well, because I think Richard may be able to answer some of those rather than Chris. But if they missed the odd one, I've tried to scribble down well, then remind us all, Councillor Dundas. Chris, I'm going to ask you to pick up on the money side, but I appreciate that you won't be able to comment necessarily on some of the other things that Councillor Dundas was asking.
Yes, thank you, Chair. I'm going to need some help from colleagues on some of the detail around capital schemes, etc. But just to sort of pick up, is the capital programme affordable? Well, yes, it is at the point in time that the budget's set. It's around the delivery side of it. If that doesn't, if that's rescheduled in any way, then the dynamics change slightly. And it's probably worth mentioning that some of the underlying spending pressures are picked up in the emerging draft budget for 25-26. So not a perfect answer, but hopefully a sign of direction of travel. Turnstone, the reason that's not shown as an overspend is that we have a significant reserve in place. So any shortfall on the budget for Turnstone would be met from the reserve, which is why it was created at the end of 23-24. So garden waste income, that's been corrected in the emerging 25-26 draft budget. So it's quite right to say that it wasn't picked up in the February budget. The payout turn assumptions, we've not preempted the pay award in there, but that's yet to be decided. That's a cabinet decision. CNG enabling works and Moot Hall, and I've forgotten what the other one was. I'm going to have to ask colleagues to help me out on that one.
Okay, thanks, Chris. I'm going to pass on to Richard Block, and I know that Councillor Corey is also online, so if Mark would like to add anything, I'll bring him in as well. Richard.
So just a more general point around the concerns around the capital programme, which I hear, as I said in Chairman's briefing, we do have quite a robust programme management approach to manage our capital programme. I think where the issues are is linking that up with our budget setting at the beginning of the year, and certainly for this forthcoming budget, I think will be a lot more connected between the two. But I'd just reiterate the point that Chris made around the significant amount of external funding that we're actually sitting on. And one of the schemes I mentioned that is significantly delayed is a 10 million scheme of St Botolph's, which actually isn't ours, it's Essex County Council who are the lead on that. So we're banker, we hold the money, but ultimately the delivery is via Essex. In terms of the more specific schemes around Colchester, So the Moot Hall actually is going to come in well under £1 million. We are at a stage now where I think if planning permission hasn't been granted, it's certainly going to be considered imminently, and we're anticipating works to be completed by April next year and a significantly lower cost than £1 million. So I am comfortable that the provision there is sufficient, and indeed we won't need all of the capital for that particular element, albeit I will say that we are going to need to spend some money on this building more generally, but that will come forward as part of the future capital expenditure. In terms of the CNG enabling works, we had our slot booked, and unfortunately we are wading through the treacle of Essex highways at the moment, trying to get the appropriate sign-off from them in terms of the works that we've actually got provisioned. We are worried about that. We're worried that we'll lose our slot if we can't get that permission, but as you'd expect, we're trying every avenue available to us to expedite that with Essex, but by and large it's out of our control, unfortunately. We've done everything we can. We've designed a scheme, we have contractors ready, but we do need them to actually sign off. I think that was it for all the specific capital schemes. On the pay offer, I can say that a revised pay offer has been provided to Unison, that's been put to their members. They're being consulted at the moment, and if that's accepted, and the recommendation is that it is accepted by the trade union, I think the pressure will be an additional 350,000.
Thank you. I think there was one other little thing, was it around Stanway?
I was going to mention Toucan Crossing. Perhaps I'll come back to that. Just if I can just pick up on a couple of the points. On the Turnstone one, you're absolutely right. I'm aware of that. It'll come out reserves, but at some point, if you like, as there's an accounting journal there that it's down as income at the moment. You know, you have to take it out of income, and then it goes into use of reserves in our outturn. That has to be on our budget papers somewhere, because otherwise we're not seeing a true picture of what's happening in the council. On the Moot Hall, firstly, I think that's really good news, because I think some of the figures being bandied around just to get the Moot Hall open were many multiples of £1 million, actually. So notwithstanding the other necessary works which are going to come forward for the building as a whole, you know, if we can at least get the Moot Hall open and flowing again from it for less than the budgeted figure, I think that's really good news, and we can definitely take a positive from that. So yeah, just to comment on the fact that, you know, if income goes down and we start using more reserves, there is a journal, there's an accounting journal there, and it has to show somewhere. And the Toucan Crossing, I just for my personal interest, as somebody who's had meetings with parish councils about 8 years ago, I'd be interested to know what's going on there.
Do you have the answer to that one?
I don't on that. I'll have to come. It's the one that I don't know about. We'll come back to you though outside of the committee. Thanks.
All right, thank you. Councillor Corey, I noticed your hand up. Was there anything you wanted to pick up?
Thank you, Chair. Hopefully you can hear me. I'm just driving. Apologies. And I did lose some of Richard's response. I may be covering the same ground, but I just wanted to say on the Northern Gateway Highways project, we are actually moving forward well on that. We had period. It was not going to be developed till summer 2025. We believe that will be on track, but
Mark, we're losing.
Making sure.
We keep losing you, so I'm going to cut you off at this point and come back to members in the room.
Okay.
Thank you. Councillor Smith.
Thank you. 2 points, if I may. The first one was the issue of the extra costs because on the local plan, because items that have been requested to be rolled over, we didn't agree that had been rolled over, but they still need to be paid for. And so it's coming out of the current year's budget, as I understood it. If we if we cancel a rollover request, we have to make sure we don't need the money. Otherwise, we're just playing with the figures. So I was a bit concerned about that one. And the second one is you mentioned that we'd got a large sum of money in for capital projects from other parties that we haven't spent yet because the projects weren't ready. I was always taught by my dad that I never paid a bill until they sent me a red copy of it. Clearly, some government department or the other is generously giving us money before we actually need it. Presumably that means we can keep the interest. Is that the case? And if so, can you give us a rough idea as to how much some kind person has put into our bank account, please?
Okay. Chris?
I'm going to have to ask Richard to come in about the local plan point and the roll forward. But with regard to the bank interest, yeah, I can confirm that the council does get to keep that. I'm going to have to get back to you with an estimated figure or an exact figure even as to what we've got in advance. I don't have that figure at my fingertips, but I will do some digging and come back to you on that point.
Thank you. That's somewhere in one of the tables that we've either had previously or we've got in front of us. But anyway, Richard, about the local plan.
Yeah, so the local plan issue, the history behind that is that a budget was carried forward year on year on year. It wasn't a kind of an annual revenue budget that was fixed in on the basis that we would need to spend it at some point over the next few years to do a significant amount of the preparatory work around our new local plan, and it's fallen in this year. So, I mean, I'd be interested in Chris's views, but normally that's the sort of thing you'd utilise reserves for, a sort of one-off spend, whereas what we were doing was we were carrying forward budget year on year in the general fund budget, which probably isn't the best way of dealing with it, but Chris probably got a view on that.
Chris, thank you.
Yeah, I mean, I can't rule out completely that there won't be any roll forwards going in the future, but what I can give you assurance is they'll be greatly reduced. I think the other thing to stress is the consequence of this is actually neutral. So if that money had been set aside in a roll forward budget to be spent the following year, we'd have still had the same outcome in accounting and cash terms. So there's no harm done in effect, but it is probably not the most streamlined accounting approach, if you like, and we've changed that predominantly at the end of the year. We've reduced that and the way in which we've developed the budget for 24-25 and even more so in 25-26, moving towards setting stuff aside in reserves and then drawing down from earmarked reserves, which is the more usual way of doing it. So.
Thank you. And I think that sort of comes back to a point that we perhaps want to make to Cabinet, not necessarily about whether the current capital programme is affordable, because that's in the budget, but whether or not what's in the existing capital programme for 24-25 is actually deliverable. There's a difference, isn't there? Right, I've got Councillor Willits next, please.
Chairman, can I make a remark about the income and expenditure? We're told that the capital financing costs have come down by 1.6 million because we haven't moved forward on the capital programme. If, however, you look at the general fund subjective analysis, which is in with the papers for today, Appendix C, and contrast that with the original agreed budget back in February time, capital financing costs have come down from 13.1 million to next to nothing, 110,000, and income has come down, income interest has come down from 9.5 million in the agreed budget to 273,000, which is rather more than the 1.6 differential that is being quoted. And I was interested to hear that with all these capital funds which government has paid us in advance, because Councillor Smith's dad wasn't running the government department, that we're receiving significant interest. And presumably that's not shown on the Q2 subjective analysis of only £273,000 in investment income, because the interest on the 19 and 20 million pounds would be substantially more than that. So I'm just wondering how this is working, because I don't quite see how the square is closed on these values. That's my first question. I'll stop.
Thank you, Councillor Willett. I think, bear in mind, this is only one quarter, so in terms of interest.
Q2 it's Q2 to September.
Yeah. Okay.
I think it's a fair question, Councillor Willits, and I'll take that back to the team. I think what has happened is I know for a fact that the capital financing cost did actually come along quite late in the day, and it's possible that this table hasn't been updated, so it's possibly just a timing difference. But you're quite right, but I will investigate and confirm that. So I do apologise if that's the case.
Thank you. And my second question is back to a point that's already been mentioned. That is the Turnstone project. Although I appreciate that it's difficult to ask certain questions and information in public, so I'll try and avoid creating any problems. The detailed analysis for the Turnstone project says, and I think it was on page 49, page 49. Yeah, it says on 49, commercial investments, significant pressure from Northern Gateway Turnstone has recently been recognised. Now, in terms of a sort of financial report to the Governance Committee, that seems to be extremely vague. I would have thought it should have said it has been recognised in regard to the following quanta, so that we understand just what are these significant pressures. It may be that they have not actually materialised in Q2 or by Q2, but they should still be shown for the year-end forecast. So I think we're being a bit coy in not including that information in the detailed analysis which you have presented to us this evening. And the second point on the same project is I was just a little alarmed to hear that some of the costs which perhaps are mentioned on page 49 are going to be charged directly to the £4 million reserve, which was reported to G&A back in September. It would seem that we're running two sets of accounts: the accounts that are reported to G&A committee on income expenditure, and another set of accounts which consist of someone somewhere charging a reserve for a loss which we can't report because it's confidential, and balancing the book that way. I just feel very, very uncomfortable about being advised that that process is going on, because surely as a scrutiny committee on finance chairman, we should be looking at all the transactions of the council, not just those which occur in one particular ledger, and having a hidden ledger process operating in background. I find that extremely worrying, and I hope that we can have an explanation this evening. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. Bearing in mind, how we've discussed Turnstone previously, I would just say let's be slightly circumspect about how we respond to those comments and how we make those requests for information.
It's Chris, a process, Chairman, process, not the values, which must remain confidential.
Exactly, and I agree with you totally, Councillor Willits, that it's important that this committee understands what is going on in terms of the budget and the Q2 outturns and how Northern Gateway impacts on that. Chris.
Yes, thank you, Chair. I think for the benefit of the committee, I just want to make it quite clear that we don't operate two sets of books, just to reassure members of the committee. That's completely untrue. So, and with regards to the reporting of the spending and reserves, that naturally flows through this report. So if you look at Q4, for example, which was exceptional because we had a major review of reserves and there was exceptional movements on that one occasion. When we get to the Q4 report, when we present reserve movements in detail, each and every single reserve movement will be reported in this report. So it's not true, I'm afraid, but we are only at Q2. I don't want to, obviously I can't speak publicly about the Turnstone position, but there are, you know, significant potential uncertainties around exact figures and that sort of thing at this stage, and that's all I'll say. So, but the bottom line is that it will be, you know, any shortfalls should they emerge, would be met from the reserve, which is why it's set up for. Which is what it's set up for.
Thank you. Councillor Willett.
Well, Chairman, can I ask the question, have any shortfalls been charged to that reserve and have not been reported in, as specific items in item 7 on the paper, the General Reserve Fund? Now, if you look back to, say, the September meeting of this committee, the reserve statement had a complete list of all the reserves and what had moved in and out. Now, I appreciate Chris's point that perhaps you only do that once a year, but if there have been movements out of the Turnstone Reserve to meet deficits, if that has happened, then this committee should have been notified of them. If it hasn't happened, if it's just a wise precaution on the part of the Finance Department to establish the reserve, and it might never be used. I mean, we you know, the vagaries of life, it may be that in a few months' time that reserve can just be wiped out because it's no longer needed. But if there have been any charges to that reserve that have not been reported to this committee as part of our income and expenditure, then I think we should have a confidential statement about what they are.
I agree with you, Councillor Willett, but I'm just going to bring Mr Hartgrove in to respond directly to your question.
Just to confirm, there's been no charges to the reserve so far this year.
Right, Councillor Sunnox.
Can I come back, start with a very small presentational point? Table 8.1 seems to be a new, well, possibly not new, but a presentation of the HRA where too much, I feel, has been lumped into capital finance costs. So you've got your interest there, and effectively you've got your profit ladled in there, and depreciation, I think, all in there. And it would be a request that in the future, can we have those broken out? It would be also useful to have the format where we saw what the management charge and the management costs were. That seems to have been lost. And I have been asking for a breakdown of the HRA management costs for ages. And it would be just so useful to have that, because I feel that, well, I've been saying it for a long time, I feel there's a lot of bunts in there, and that our costs are roughly twice what they should be on HRA management. So that's a presentational point. Can I move straight on? Yep. Turnstone Reserve. I mean, I think we just have to have it crystal clear that everything goes through the income and expenditure account, and that we should be, even if we haven't spent any money, even not a penny has gone out on Turnstone yet, we should be putting it in the outturn forecast. So I think we've just got to get used to having some of those big movements going through there. We can play around with the reserves later, but it's just really important that we have that transparency. And if there's a problem, then we should, you know, we should disclose it. I just think we need to agree that as a principle. And the reason why I'm particularly sensitive about it is because last year there was a 4 million deficit in our income and expenditure account. It was reported in the Quarter 4 monitoring report. So naturally, we all thought the reserves would go down by 4 million. But they didn't. They went down by, I don't know, 600,000 or something, not very much at all. And I still haven't got to the bottom of exactly what happened. It's something to do with business rates. And in this case, it wasn't cost that was going through reserves reported. It was income coming through reserves unreported. And, you know, we now hear government saying that councils are hoarding money and so on, and you can sort of see why. It was tucked away in a reserve and then popped out when it was convenient, just when we had a loss, and the two were offset without ever going through the income and expenditure account. So I just think we have to have it crystal clear that everything goes through there. It'll take a little while for the team to adapt, but I think we just have to have that clear. My next point, or I think my other point, is the major one. What do we have to do to get this capital expenditure going? Because, you know, we've seen the benefit, the short-term benefit, but as the longer we wait, yes, it's nice having the interest on money, and but we've got to remember that costs are inflating. We suddenly find we haven't got enough money to do all the things we promised to do. I don't think any of these grants are index linked. We've been given money, and I feel that we need to spend it. And we need to put pressure on our teams to do that and to really see some drive and not just find other people to blame. And it's a matter of dynamism and energy to get these schemes moving. And I feel we need to get into that. And that's one of the reasons why I'm pleased that we've cancelled rollovers in our budget, Chris. Very, you know, that's cancelling rollovers is great if you want to get things moving. It's bad in March every year. You sort of have Operation Spendthrift going on to try and get everything into your spend done. But I feel that we need some hurry-uppers over that, and that we need quite a sort of culture change about it. And all of this is accelerated by the prospect of devolution and the fact that everything may be merged in. We need to get that. If we think that capital expenditure is worthwhile, then let's jolly well get it done. And let's ask the question, what can we do? And I guess this is more a question for Richard Block than for Chris, who's merely reporting it. What can we do to get it moving?
Thank you, Councillor Sunnix. Just a couple of things that I'll come back on before I bring Chris in. One, with regard to Turnstone, you know, I have shared everyone's concerns around this table about Turnstone, and I have ensured that we've had those in confidence briefings, and I will continue to ensure that if there is any need for further involvement of all councillors, not just those of us sat around this table, that takes place. And I know that the leader's sitting at the back and he's aware of that as well. The second point around the monies that are going into town centre development that have come mainly from central government in the two tranches. Councillor Dundas and I will know from sitting on meeting after meeting after meeting how complex some of the background is to bringing those projects to fruition. And I think Richard's already touched on the fact that the St Botolph's one is very much led by Essex County Council. So although we may want to see it happening yesterday, we're beholden to the project lead to make that happen. Richard, is there anything else that you wanted to comment on before I bring Chris in about the money?
No, I'll just reiterate, we have a real engine room in terms of driving these projects. And what normally delays them is where partners let us down, I'll be honest, where there's complexity that's created. I'll take an example of the Smart Square, you know. We were geared up ready to deliver that probably a year and a half ago, but various complicating factors involving partners, including highways, who I've mentioned a couple of times, that's when we get delays on schemes. We have a really robust programme and project management process and resources and teams allocated. We have, you know, good steering groups and governance involving members as well on those big regen projects, so there's member oversight. But invariably, when things fall down is when we have complexity regarding a particular issue associated with partners, I'd say, and highways is probably one of the biggest ones. You know, in terms of the schemes that we've talked about, St Botolph's, the scheme, the highways improvement works at Northern Gateway, St Mark's Square. Highways is a significant function.
Thank you. And I think it's fair to say, Paul, that you and I have both said at those meetings there needs to be deadlines and timetables that are adhered to. Just very quickly, I'll bring you in and then I'll bring Chris back to answer the other questions.
Yeah, I was just going to say, I think to add to that, I think it is important when we look at our capital programme that we do, I mean, obviously it's separated out in the table, but we do need to separate out those projects which are what I call our own capital programme, the town deal and the Luff ones, because one we have complete control over and is relevant to our financing costs. One we have a degree of control over but isn't actually relevant to our financing costs. And the other one we don't have direct control over and isn't relevant to our financing costs. So the one we need to concentrate is probably our own internal one.
Okay, thank you. I'm going to ask Chris just to come back to the others that you asked, William, and then I'll bring you back in.
Just on this capital programme.
Very quickly.
Yes. I hear all the points made and all the complexity of it. I understand that. It's the engine. Everything we've talked about is about guidance and committees and everything else. We need to develop an engine that drives these things through. And, you know, the fact is that we only spent 6% of our general fund capital programme by half-time this year. I mean, this is, and even if it's other people who are doing it, it's us who needs to provide the drive. It's our budget, it's our responsibility, it's our city. And I don't feel that the type of drive that you need fits very easily into local authority culture. But we need to develop that. It's an important point.
Let me stop you there. I'm going to ask Chris to come back on the remarks that you've made, or the queries that you've raised around the finances. Then I'll bring Councillor King in briefly, and then I'm going to come back to the agenda, and I'll just remind you all that in terms of our recommended decisions, what I'm suggesting is that we, not only the four that we have in front of us, that we also ask Cabinet to report or to consider what in the current capital programme is actually deliverable in the remainder of the year. Chris.
Okay, so thanks for your comments and questions, Councillor Summits. Just to pick up, I suppose, very briefly on the HRA presentation, this sort of Colchester custom and practice. This table hasn't changed, I believe, in some time. So I'll reflect on your comments of the presentation of it, and we'll have a look. If there's any I'm always looking to improve in terms of transparency, so I'll feed that back. With regards to the reserves now, hopefully it's accepted that there has been an improvement in clarity around that recently. However, I will concede I didn't have as much time to do as much as I'd have liked in this particular report around reserves due to pressures on the preparing the budget at the same time. So you'll have to bear with me on that one, and I am committed to producing further analysis on the reserves in the Q3 report. It is, I must stress, extremely difficult to project the outturn on earmark reserves when you've constantly got external funding coming in from the left field almost on occasion. So it tends to be a case of reporting what's happened after the event rather than necessarily foreseeing it. However, most of the big reserves are predictable to a degree, to be fair. Which leads me on to the business rates reserve. Now, I think once again I've got to set the record straight here that the business rates income does come via the income and expenditure account, always has done, because that complies with proper accounting practice as implemented by my predecessors and and we followed the code the same as they did. So can we just be very clear about that? Can the committee be reassured that that doesn't happen? The council has also had a business rates reserve. It's a stabiliser reserve, I think is one of the terms you describe it as, for some years, whereby it's protected itself against fluctuations in the business rates retention system. Now, because the council's been very successful in terms of its business rates collection in recent years, and growth in its tax base in particular, it's been basically getting large returns from business rates retention. And you know, there's no right or wrong answer to this. The actual budget assumption is probably, in recent years, has been somewhat smaller than the actual take from the business rates retention system. So it's a smoothing reserve. That's why there's no variance there, and there is this reserve. You know, the reserve, it either accumulates in the reserve or is defrayed from the reserve as part of the process. But the waters were, I must stress this, and I've mentioned it at the last meeting, that, sorry, at the Q4 meeting, should I say, that those waters were muddied somewhat by the pandemic, because the council received vast sums, like all other councils, the Section 31 grant funding from the government during the pandemic, and that accumulated in the business rates reserve. So you saw a massive balance at one stage. I forget how much it was, but it was a very large figure, and that was defrayed to offset the losses in the collection fund at the time. We're now back, it's now back in surplus, so we no longer need to do that. So there was a totally unprecedented peak in that particular reserve. Last year there was a big surplus, as you quite rightly say, of 4 million. That wasn't unexpected. That was we'd had some work done, admittedly relatively late in the financial year. It was done in December 2023, so within about 200,000, I think we were expecting exactly what we got. So that came as no surprise whatsoever. That could have been more widely reported, but that came at a time when we were developing the transparency of the report. Now, most of this difference arises because of the large difference between the base budget assumption and what the council is actually receiving from the business rates reserve. In terms of developing the emerging budget for draft budget for 25-26, the actual amount that's built into the base budget is significantly more than the council's had in there in recent years. So that difference comes right down. So moving forwards, you know, the 4 millions, you know, we wishful thinking that we would ever get a surplus of that order in the future. So,
thank you, Chris. I'm going to bring Councillor King in very quickly, because I've got 3 members still wishing to speak, and given the time, I'd like to get this item concluded before we have a break. Councillor King.
Thank you, Chair, and thank you again, committee. I'd love to hear you chew on the facts in front of you. I just want to address the sentiment, much anything else, William, about drive, determination, and the need to get capital spend going. And I always prefer to talk to the facts. So the facts are, it is unacceptable that we are spending at the rate that we show and forecast. This has been a concern for me for, I suspect, every year I've been here, and this year perhaps more so. I have taken personally, as much as I can, a role in ensuring, sharing the experience I do have in this area through things absolutely not going right. Vast amounts of money get spent by government, and not all of it, let's be frank, well, that's true in the private sector, but it certainly is true in government departments. We have to have a culture where we are rooted in realism, not in optimism. And this is very difficult. We've had this conversation here before, which is given that the bidding process inevitably is a little bit separate from the act of delivery. They bid, secure, and then spend, the latter is much more challenging than the promise exchange you have at the beginning with government departments, particularly about particularly about external funding. So I just want to make that fair point, but I want to acknowledge the point you're making. We're absolutely not in the right place. We have got some very talented, hard-working people. You've had them here and in scrutiny showing what they're doing. But overall, it's not in the right place. And I'm personally invested. The Chief Executive, senior team, Richard, had the pleasure of some repeated conversations about what we can do to add extra drive and extra realism to forecast, so that over a period of time we have ourselves much closer to where we should be in terms of spend going out of the door as forecast. So it's just a personal commitment. I get it. Make whatever observations you want, but this is understood. I hope we start to see better. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor King. Very quickly, Councillor Sunnucks, is there anything you wanted to come back on? Okay, I've got Councillor Kelly, Councillor Dundas and Councillor Smith. Councillor Kelly.
Thank you. This is hopefully quite a quick question. I'm just looking for a bit of reassurance really on something that I have read several times in the general fund revenue budget variance analysis. There's a phrase that pops up a couple of times, which is overspend forecast on employee costs due to not having had sufficient vacant posts. And when I read that, it concerns me because it looks like the budget is being based on the assumption that somebody might leave, and that it's, well, hopefully they'll leave, and if they do, we'll be on target, and if they don't, well, we'll be over budget. So please, somebody leave. But then they didn't, and we're overspending. So I guess what I'm looking for here is from somebody is some reassurance that that isn't how we're doing it, and that that means something that not what I just said. Basically, good English for me. Thank you.
Thank you. I mean, I'll bring Richard Block in at this point, but all I would say is that in organisations that I've worked in, the budget always had some inbuilt recognition of staff turbulence, so that there will be vacancies at times during, and I think that's what's happening here, but I'll stand corrected if I'm wrong.
No, that's it. And we have typically a turnover rate of around 10%, and across a workforce of 700, 800 people, you're never going to fill those jobs straight away. So there's a kind of recognition built into the budget that there's a bit of slippage between posts becoming vacant and then getting a new post holder in effectively across such a large workforce.
And sometimes that might be, some years you'll have greater numbers of vacancies than other years, and it depends very much on what's happening in the general employment landscape. Does that answer, Councillor Kelly?
I suppose it answers the question, but it doesn't necessarily reassure me that that's the best way of doing things, I suppose.
Okay. Councillor Dundas.
Thank you, Chair. I promise this is going to be the last time I mention reserves this evening, and I'm not going to mention Turnstone. I just wanted to pick up on what Councillor Sunnucks said and just sort of sum up why it's important for this committee, because, you know, a few meetings ago we sat here and looked at an outturn which showed this council making a deficit of £4.5 million in the year. And for us as councillors who, you know, read the papers quite quickly or whatever, our natural assumption would be, oh my goodness, we're running at a £4.5 million deficit. That's got about 20% of our revenue budget. That's really bad news. It's only when we look at a completely different table that we find out actually we did run a deficit, but it was £600,000. Okay, because that's been the movement in reserves. All we're asking is if in a conventional company, if you've got, after you've had your income, had your expenditure, money's come in and out, your bottom line figure is charged to the capital account and they match, okay? All we're saying is whatever that figure says, as a council, if we make a surplus, we can only put it into reserves. If we run a deficit, we can only take it from reserves. That's all we can do as an organisation. Whatever that bottom line figure outturn on the figure on the papers we look at the end of the year, on the 31st of March, whatever the change in reserves is, they should match. If they match, we are reassured and get a full picture and don't make incorrect assumptions about what's actually happening to the finances of the council, because we could have really easily have done that on the last year and come away with the impression we're in a lot more trouble than we actually are as a council. So that's my plea, and that's why it matters.
Okay, thank you. I know a number of us attended the briefing on local government finances 2 weeks ago, was it? Something like that. Time moves quickly when you're having fun looking at figures, doesn't it? But I know that there were a number of questions that evening about why everything isn't as straightforward in local government accounting as it is in most business accounts. So there is a bit of flipping and flopping. But Chris, I don't know whether you want to come back on that at all. If not, we'll move on.
I haven't got much to add really. I think I've said most of it, but just to reiterate, I think I recognise exactly what you're saying, Councillor Dundas, but I would stress that you've got a backward focus in terms of what the reporting style, and going forwards we have significantly greater clarity, and I'd be disappointed if there were any surprises at the year end. So.
Thank you. Right, I've got Councillor Smith.
Thank you. Yes, this is also fairly brief, but I am getting fed up with hearing suggestions coming in that we're running two sets of accounts, or that things aren't being done quite rightly, or that our staff are responsible for delaying projects because they're not dynamic enough, or what have you. You know, we have a dedicated workforce here. We have benchmarking figures showing how good or bad our services are. And I really think that councillors should show some respect for our workforce rather than making some of the comments that I've heard tonight. And I'm very disappointed in the councillors that have made them.
Thank you, Councillor Smith. I think in some respects I would concur with your comments, but in other respects I think it's essential that members of the committee have the opportunity to ask questions, to pose suggestions, and to comment on whether or not they think something is operating in the way that they think it should do. And long may that continue. I think, that's democracy in action. I'm going to...
I think that's quite right, but when you're criticising the staff...
Yeah, I take
we're politicians.
Yeah.
If you want to criticise us, that's fine, but staff have no right of reply.
Absolutely. Okay. Councillor Willits, just
add a
very
recommendation,
quickly.
please, Chairman.
Yeah, and I was going to add my recommendation as well. So if you have another recommendation, go ahead.
Yes, I would like to recommend an additional recommendation to Cabinet. It would read something like, insofar as it is permitted by accounting standards, all transactions fall within the orbit of the income and expenditure account. Notwithstanding, that would require a confidential section to the income and expenditure account seen by councillors.
Okay. I'm not entirely sure what that recommendation is seeking. Just run it past us again, please.
All transactions fall within the orbit of the income and expenditure account. I mean, that is the kernel, and that there will be no transactions taking out of reserves without being reported to councillors.
Okay, thank you. I think we've already been reassured, though, by Mr. Hartgrove that that is the case. The question that was posed around the reserve that's been established regarding Turnstone, the question was whether or not any of that has been spent, and Mr. Hartgrove responded.
Nevertheless, I would like to see clarity on this point, Chairman, which is why I propose this additional recommendation. Now, if councillors believe that all transactions should not go via the income and expenditure account, they have an opportunity to oppose this.
Okay, that's fine. Yep, I'm happy to table that, and we'll vote on it. Councillor Smith?
So could I get clarity on that? You mean that if we revalue an asset, that's a changement in reserves, our revalue asset reserve would change, and you want that to go through the income expenditure. I don't quite know how legally you could do that.
Only so far as it's required or permitted by the accounting standards, but where there is a transaction which should otherwise go through the income and expenditure account, even if it is a transaction in regard to one of our commercial activities, which the council would prefer was not disclosed, it still needs to go via the income and expenditure. That is the case which I think we're guarding against.
Okay, thank you. All right, so I'll table that for the committee members to consider. The one that I wanted to put forward, as I've already indicated, was just to ask Cabinet whether or not the existing capital programme for 24-25 is deliverable. So I'll take Councillor Willett's. So we've got the other four. I'm presuming from the comments and the discussions that we've had that the other four are okay because they don't require anything anyway. We're just noting, commenting, discussing. So if I come to Councillor Willett's. Chris.
Sorry, Chair. Just to be helpful, perhaps, if I've understood Councillor Willett's suggestion, and I'm not 100% sure I have, but I think you're suggesting that all of the transactions that actually go within the council's statement of accounts would be reported here, which they are. Ironically, they're on this tonight's agenda for 23-24, and that is obviously a huge undertaking, which is why the accounts themselves have been late. So for a number of years,
Okay, thanks, Chris. I'm just going to take one more speaker, and then I'm going to put it to the vote that the recommendation that Councillor Willetts is putting before us.
Just for clarity, I think Councillor Willetts meant the general fund reserves, not like the total assets of the council, with the general fund reserves, which is 29,627,000, not the cash reserves, in other words.
Right. Chris?
Can I just reassure you that's the point I was making about Q3. So just sorry to use an epic example here. I do report each quarter with the movement in earmark reserves, and it lists each and every reserve, so the ins and the outs and the balance at the end of each quarter. So I do that. It's the bit that I'm a bit reluctant around is around the forecasting, because it's very difficult to forecast, fairly sort of, I don't like to use the word obscure, but some sort of reserves quite unpredictable in terms of both income in and expenditure out. So it's difficult to do on a comprehensive basis, but your major ones you can.
Councillor Sunnox.
Yes, Councillor Willett's amendment talked about all transactions fall within the orbit of the income and expenditure account. And I think the key is whether usable reserves are affected. It's the movements in usable reserves. Everything to do with those goes through that income and expenditure account. We don't have any movements going on. If you look at the income and expenditure account, the bottom line of it, that's the movement in the usable reserves. To answer Councillor Smith's point, the unusable reserves, the pension reserves and the revaluation reserves, we wouldn't try and monitor those. It's the transactions we want to get at.
Okay, so that's slightly different, I think, to...
But it's exactly the same wording, but it's explaining it.
Okay, fine. Chris?
Sorry to come back on this point, but just to be clear, the actual general fund reserve, the unallocated balance, if you look in paragraph 7.3, the movement on that is projected there, so that is the estimated balance on that. And also moving to the HRA balance, paragraph 8.4, it's actually set out there, the table in terms of the projected balance on the HRA reserves. The bit that isn't there is the movement on general fund earmarked reserves, and that's the part that will come in Q3. So that will, I think that makes the full set that you seek.
I think taking a forward-looking approach gets us there.
Right. Okay. So Councillor Willett's recommendation motion is on the table. Just read it again, Councillor Willits, and then we'll take the vote.
Insofar as it is permitted by accounting standards, all transactions falling within the orbit of the income and expenditure account, notwithstanding that may require a confidential section to the income and expenditure account presented to councillors.
Thank you. Okay. Those in favour? 1, 2, 3. And against? No? Okay. In that case, it's carried. And the other recommendation to Cabinet that I was suggesting is that the current capital, we asked Cabinet whether the current capital programme is deliverable in 24-25.
Can it be recorded abstentions on that? Because
Yeah.
some of us just didn't
Yeah.
understand what was being asked for. I certainly didn't.
Apologies, you're quite right. I should have asked for abstentions. So I'll ask for abstentions on the last. So that's 3 abstentions. Okay. Right. No, that's 3 abstentions, and I haven't voted because I was holding my vote just in case I needed to. Bearing in mind what I've heard from our Deputy Section 151 officer, I'm going to vote against. Okay. Right. So I think, Matt, you got the votes for that? So.
Is that a recommendation? So, Councillor Willett's recommendation is to Cabinet as well, and
Yes,
not just to
it's to Cabinet.
Thank you.
All right. And then, I say, my recommendation is that we ask Cabinet whether the current capital programme is deliverable in 24-25. All in favour? Right, I think that's unanimous. Okay. Thank you. All right, I think that completes item 7. It's just gone 20 to 8. So I'm going to suggest that we break until, I'll be generous, let's call it 5-2. There may be somebody who needs a cigarette break. I know there has been previously. So, yeah, so well, that gives you 13 minutes, 5-2, right? Okay, see you all back here at I'm just awaiting Mr. Evans rejoining us. No, he's had to respond to something urgently. Evening all again, and welcome back to the Governance and Audit Committee on 26th of November 2024. We will move on now to item 8, the Treasury Management Quarter 2 update, and I will ask Chris Hartgrove just to introduce this one for us, please.
Okay, thank you, Chair. Item 8 then, which appears on pages 57 to 68 of your document pack this evening, sets out the Treasury Management Quarter 2 position for 24-25. In other words, an update based on available information as of the 30th of September 2024. I don't propose to go through the report in detail, Chair, but just to remind the committee that this report provides an update on the adopted Treasury Management Strategy for 24-25, which was considered by this committee on the 18th of June 24 and was subsequently adopted by full council on the 17th of July 2024. The committee is also asked to note that due to tight committee deadlines, this report was drafted almost immediately after the end of quarter 2 in October. That means that some detail, such as the medium-term capital financing requirement of the HRA, will need to be updated in the quarter 3 report to reflect the emerging draft budget for 25-26 that is scheduled for Cabinet tomorrow night. Onto the detail then. Suffice to say, it continues to be a very quiet financial year on the Treasury Management front. As highlighted in the quarter 2 budget monitoring report that I just presented, slippage on the capital programme is contributing to a suppressed need for external borrowing, with the overall borrowing as presented on pages 62 to 64 declining from 151.6 million to 147.6 million during the first 6 months of the year. In other words, a £4 million decline. Treasury management investments, which are presented on pages 64 to 135, have fallen by 9.2 million during the period, from 25.6 million to 16.4 million since the start of the year. The managed reduction in investment balances is further suppressing the need for external borrowing. So as investments have been maturing, they've been utilised as a replacement for actual external borrowing. Performance against Treasury management indicators is also presented beginning on page 66. Targets have been met in nearly all cases, with the only exception being the liquidity risk indicator, where there was a short-term technical breach. Total cash available within 3 months temporarily fell to 11.4 million at the quarter end, which is below the target balance of 20 million. A council of the size and nature of Colchester City Council has millions of pounds passing through its books on an almost daily basis, of course, and so strict adherence to this indicator requires robust cash flow forecasting process. Experience shows that the council is adept at having access to sufficient instant access funds to avoid a net overdrawn position with the bank, but perhaps could possibly do a little better in managing the interrelationship with short-term investments. This is a topic that I've actually flagged for, treasury management is a topic that I've flagged for additional review as part of the internal audit programme in the year ahead. I must stress that I'm not aware of any significant problem here, but I do want them to look specifically at the interrelationship with the treasury management strategy. So happy to take any questions.
Thank you, Mr Hartgrove. Councillor Dundas.
Yeah, just very briefly, just to pick up on the one target not met, the fact that we went down to 11.47 million 30th of September, which was then up to nearly 30 million by the 15th of November. I just wondered what the explanation of that is. You know, I mean, I know you sort of said it was a temporary thing. There must have been a reason. Just wondering, any more information?
The reason is that the unforeseen cash flows is a simple answer. But, you know, to get behind the detail, that's one of the things that I want internal audit to look at specifically. So I must stress that the council, you know, has not gone overdrawn as such in the bank. That's the kind of thing that would happen if we were struggling significantly in that department. But I do want to understand how we can better meet the prudential indicators in that area. So it's more a case of fine tuning than anything else. But
okay, thank you. Councillor Sunnock.
Yes, I'd like to draw people's attention to page 60 of the report. 2 points on this one. The first is that there's a new borrowing forecast that if we do our capital expenditure programme, which is clearly a big if, we'll have to borrow an extra 144 million. So, you know, if our capital expenditure programme is going to be spent, we're going to have to go out, borrow on the market 144.4 million, which will be at sort of 4.85% interest rates. And then we've got above that, well, the first point is that comes from a table, a calculation, where it's not anything like a normal sort of cash flow, where you say you've got your opening cash plus your investment, your capital expenditure, plus your deficit, whatever that is, that should give you your closing cash. That's the sort of thing I'd expect to see. This is a sort of local authority, and you'll say, oh, you don't understand local authority accounting, but this is all in terms of capital financing requirements and all sorts of, none of those figures, except for the external borrowing, is recognisable from the balance sheet. So I'd make the request, my first request would be, can we sort of understand this in terms of normal cash flow? Perhaps that's impossible, I don't know. And my second question is, above we have these projections of borrowing rates, and we're still using in our financial appraisals rates that are a lot lower than this, and we are going to have to borrow. So again, this needs to come into the capital programme review. You know, can we sensibly borrow at these sort of rates that we've got in table 1, which is, you know, 4.85%ish, forecast to go down a little bit, but then coming up again. Can we afford to be borrowing at those rates to have such a big capital expenditure programme?
Chris?
yeah, I'm happy to pick up on those, Chairman. I mean, the presentation is sort of, I mean, different Treasury managers, Treasury management advisors use slightly different approaches, but it's all a variation on a theme. So that's what we've got here. It's standard local government stuff, I suppose, as you rightly point out. I suppose the context here is what I said at the beginning. So the 144 million, it's worth saying that that will come down in quarter 3 because of the revised capital programme on the HRA. That's what I alluded to at the beginning. With regards to the forecast interest rates, they only came out on the 11th of November, so they're not embedded in the figures elsewhere, and they're not embedded in the budget. Oh, sorry, they are. I do apologise. That's a mistake on my part. They are actually embedded in the emerging draft budget for 25-26. And it's also worth mentioning that the council gets, reiterating that the council gets what's known as a certainty rate. So on its general fund borrowing, it gets 0.21% discount on all PWLB rates, and at the moment on HRA borrowing, we actually get 0.6% discount. So, you know, borrowing rates will seem quite low, especially on the HRA side of things, because that's the actual rate at which the council undertakes its borrowing. But
Okay, thank you. Councillor Sunnock?
Just to come back, it's not just what we assume in the budget, where I'm sure you're on top of it. It's what we assume in the appraisals when we're appraising whether to spend our budget. And so what I'm worried about is that we're assuming too low a rate and setting ourselves to a lower hurdle to get over, and therefore investing in a way that will run us out of money. Luckily, in a way, our slowness to invest the money sort of works in our favour, because we're not actually having to borrow anymore. But I just feel we ought to be asking that that we review our appraisal rates in line with current market conditions.
Okay. I think, though, that Mr Hartgrove was suggesting that our rates are at slightly lower, and if we look at the table,
indeed, but
if we look at table 4, I mean, that gives us a better indication, doesn't it, of long-term borrowing costs.
No, sorry, we're talking about new borrowing. These are our historic borrowing costs, which were done at times, fortunately for us, done at times where interests were low. My point is that if we're going to run this sort of capital programme, we will have to borrow more money, and it will be at higher rates, and we will run ourselves out of money if we invest at, say, 3.5% and borrow at 4.8%. And I have taken in those calculations, I have taken into account the certainty rate and the further HRA discount. We're way, way, way out.
Okay, point made. Anyone? Councillor Kelly.
Oh, thank you. A sort of query around the PWLB borrowing table on page 62. And my understanding around how this stuff works might not be quite right, but I've been led to believe that you can effectively borrow again to pay back a previous loan. And if that's right, then on that table, would it be possible to have it highlighted which of those rows are being used to pay back a previous one? So you've got an idea of how many, essentially, how much of those outstanding loans are effectively being used to pay back the loans? Is that something that is that even available, or is it too mists of time, kind of they're old and you can't get that information? That was the first question. And the second question is on page 63, so the next page. Again, on the loans here, so we've loaned Havering and Middlesbrough £9 million in total, and we've borrowed from Barclays £9 million. What were those loans? They look like they look like they match up. Did we borrow from Barclays to lend it to the other councils? Because it's what it looks like in these tables here, and I'm not. Is that's just what it appears to me as a non-accountant, as an operational person, and as a member of the public who might look at this document, they go, "Oh, we basically making a couple of % on £9 million at some point."
Okay, thanks, Councillor Kelly. Chris.
Well, I think it's a fair question, but we took the loan out of Barclays in 1976 and we on-lent it to Havering in 2024. So where it was in the intervening 48 years, I don't know.
Sorry, I thought that was 76 in the future, not 76 in the past.
Oh, sorry, no, I do apologise. That's my mistake. Oh, my mistake. How embarrassing. Yeah, that's the maturity date. I do apologise. No. Sorry, I thought that was the date the loan was there. Yeah. But no is the answer. You don't borrow to on-lend. It's a coincidence.
They are very similar, but yeah, the connection is purely coincidental. Councillor Dundas.
Yeah, I was just wondering, just purely out of interest, that those two Barclays loans, I mean, I don't know if they're sort of mortgages on for property or whatever. Do we actually know what they're for? Because I mean, I'm just curious as to why we took the decision to borrow from Barclays on this occasion rather than PWLB over quite a long period of time, which looks like it's a capital expense of some description.
They're old historic loans. I'll have to go back and find out what the rationale. It predates my time with the council, but that would have been based on Treasury management advice at the time. So,
Okay.
Sorry, can I just pick up on the
Yeah.
refinancing point that you made in terms of some of these loans? I mean, it's quite possible that they are refinancing loans, but you know, we're talking about loans that were taken out several years ago. So I'm not necessarily sure how easy that is to access such historic information. It's probably worth saying that the council, like all other housing authorities, was subject to the self-financing regime back in 2012, which meant there was an influx of loans at that point when it bought itself out of the old housing subsidy system back in 2012. There would have been a massive peak at the time in terms of borrowing. So I would, before my time, but I don't know, perhaps Councillor Smith might be able to help out on this one.
Councillor Smith.
Sorry, it was on the previous question, actually. I think the Barclays loans are LOBO loans, lender option, buyer option loans, because the maturity dates would look very suspicious for a bank lending that far ahead to anyone. So I think that, and those are loans, if I'm right, where there is an option to repay at the specific time periods within the maturity date. So we won't have to keep those loans for that period if interest rates fall or rise.
Okay, thank you. Councillor Sonic.
Yes, if we have LOBO loans, they can be quite nasty because they can come and the bank comes along and says, I want 10% interest. And you say, we don't want to pay 10% interest. They say, you have to, and we'll say, we'll repay, and then we'll look and find we can't repay. So there's a nasty option embedded in them, and it would be really useful in future reports just to have an asterisk or something to remind if they are LOBO loans. And of course, that would explain we're the borrower in these cases, aren't we? That would explain actually the interest rate's probably just historic, so I'll cut that out. But if they're LOBO loans, that's a nasty option against us, and we should make a note of it.
Okay, I'm just intrigued because the table 6 refers to the Dansk loan as a LOBO, but the other two as market loans. So it would be interesting. I think, Chris, if we ask you just to go back and have a second look, if you don't know the answer, that would be helpful. Thank you.
Sorry, just to add, the LOBO loans, I think there was 3 of them originally, and 2 of them have been redeemed. There's just one working their way out of the system. They do come with some quite some technical accounting challenges, so it's not the kind of thing that I'd probably be looking for in the future. So they're just what we've inherited, and they're working their way out of the system there. So.
Thank you. Councillor Smith.
Right. I think we would be helpful if we did know exactly what these Barclays loans were, because their term looks very long for that. I would point out that LOBO stands for lender option, borrower option, so actually both sides have an option to get out of those loans if they don't want them at the fixed maturity dates.
Thank you. That's been a bit of a learning curve for me. Councillor Kelly, are you, have your queries been answered?
No, I'm actually still slightly confused now, because are these loans, the maturity dates, because I realise it could almost be either, is that 1976 or is that 2076? I didn't quite get what the answer was to that. Or 2176. It is, okay.
Okay, right. Moving on, I've no other indications, so at this point, all we're asked to do is to note the Treasury Management Quarter 2 update. We did spend a bit of time looking at this a couple of meetings ago, 3 meetings ago, and move on from item 8 to item 9. Emma, would you like to join us, please? Welcome to Emma Larkham from KPMG, who we've had the pleasure of meeting previously. We're here on this item, the draft statement of accounts 23-24. Now, I just want to remind members that this is the draft statement of accounts for 23-24 that has been published on the council's website. There may be a query or two that you may have, but I'm not expecting that anyone will have had the opportunity, because they've only just been published, to have had time to look through them in detail, and we will do that at a meeting in the early new year. Emma, is there anything you want to say about those before I bring Chris in?
Well, just to say that, so it's great to see that they're published. I think, as I have said to the committee previously, we will not be completing a detailed audit on these accounts. There is a backstop date at the end of February. The position that we are in is that we will be anticipating issuing a disclaimer opinion on these sets of accounts, which will be a pretty broad disclaimer. However, there is a number of elements of work that we do have to do to be able to issue that disclaimer. So a lot of that is around undertaking a degree of planning work, which is around understanding the entity, which we have yet to be able to start. And the other very key aspect is around the value for money opinion. So to be able to, so one of the requirements under the backstop date is that whilst you have to conclude all of the, so while we can disclaim the financial statements, you still have to issue a value for money conclusion. So there is that work that does need to be completed and reported before we can issue a disclaimer opinion. So just important to note that that work on value for money has to be concluded before I can issue a disclaimer opinion. And again, we are yet to start that work. So there's a lot to do, but obviously now Chris has got this office to-do list. Hopefully we can start getting engagement over the next couple of weeks to get that moving. And we'll come back in the new year with some reporting, hopefully.
Thank you. And just so that members around the table are aware, I did have a quick chat with Emma prior to the meeting to see if we could agree a date and a time when we could get together with KPMG for our in-camera chat. We weren't able to find a date immediately, but I will discuss with Mr. Evans, and we'll try and arrange a suitably convenient, mutually convenient time and date when we can do that, if not before the end of the current year, certainly early in the new year. Thank you. Chris, anything else that you want to say about the accounts as published?
Not much to add, Chair. Just to sort of reassure members that we've published. We actually published these on Friday, which is 22nd of November. Significantly late, it's fair to say, there's no shying away from that, but what I would stress is that's the third set of accounts that we've produced in the last 14 months since we've been here, and it's the first time since I've been here that we're actually up to date in terms of our published accounts now, if that be the right phrase to use. So it's still painful, it's a long journey, but we are progressing in the right direction, that's all I'll say.
Thank you, Chris, and I would like to thank you and Andrew and the rest of the team for doing so. Councillor Dundas.
Thank you, Chair. I'd just like to echo your comments. Thank you for your work on this. I think they came through about 10 p.m. Friday evening, I think, which probably gives an idea of what time you were working on them. I was just going to make a little suggestion, actually, Chair. Our recommended decision is to note the draft statement of accounts. You know, I'll be absolutely honest, I haven't had time to read them in detail. I will do so, but I think we should perhaps revise the wording a little bit there, and to say that we note the publication of the draft statement of accounts, and the committee will review them in detail at a future date. And I think we should actually put it back. I know we've got the backstop at the end of February in there, but I think we should sort of say before the end of the civic year or something like that, just to make it clear that we know they've been published, but we haven't had time to look at them in detail, and whatever happens as to regards the audit or the date of the disclaimed audit, we want to look at them in detail before the end of April, ideally a lot sooner.
Thank you. And I know you and I had a brief chat about this before the start of the meeting this evening, and I think that's quite sensible, because we are talking about draft statement of accounts. We will need to look at them in more detail. So I would guide members that I'm accepting of Councillor Dundas's slight amendments to the recommendation there, and I would hope that you would all go along with that as well. Those in favour? Thank you. Right. That's it for that item. Councillor Sunnox, my apologies.
Is there any more that Emma can give us on, I mean, we had hoped the new dawn was coming, that BDO were the devils incarnate, and you were the new broom coming into the place, and that we get an audit. And I'm just amazed that the news has come through just now, we've only just heard it, that we'll be getting another disclaimer. So I've got two questions. One is, can you give us any colour on why you're needing to disclaim and which areas it is the problems are in? And the second is, will it be just I've never seen a disclaimer before. I'm a chartered accountant, originally Pete Marwick, predecessor of KPMG. I've never seen a disclaimer in my life before. Will it give us any insight into what on earth has gone wrong when we get it? So two questions. What is stopping you being able to do the audit? And what will the disclaimer say?
So I'll just come in very, very briefly, because I attended the regional audit chairs meeting again last week, and I know there's lots of uncertainty about what disclaimer actually means and how it operates. My understanding from those of us who were at that meeting was that Suffolk County Council were likely to be the first of the local authorities who were represented at that meeting to publish a disclaimed set of accounts. I think that was due this week, so I haven't seen anything or heard anything since. But if I just remind everyone, we have been made aware that this set of accounts are likely to be disclaimed because of everything that's gone on before. But I'll bring you in now, Emma. Thank you.
Thank you, Chair. And so I have communicated the position around disclaimers several times to this committee and to the authority, and it is the expectation of the FRC that the majority of the 23-24 accounts where The prior years have been disclaimed. There will be a continuation of disclaimer, and that is driven by the backstop date. So just for instance, we do not have prior year accounts yet. They have not been signed. The backstop date for prior year accounts is the 13th of December. My backstop date is the 28th of February. There is not enough time to be able to deliver an audit. Putting aside, the fact that I haven't been able to review prior accounts, I've only just got a set of accounts. I haven't done any work yet because I haven't been able to, because the team have been, as Chris has said, dealing with multiple different years audits with different auditors, and actually trying to publish a set of accounts in a very difficult time frame and time pressure. So we will do the work that we need to. I'm hoping that we can get the VFM work done in time to be able to hit that deadline, but there is pressure. We need to make sure that we can do that. And then there is the process of rebuilding assurance, which is what has been communicated, and I'm very happy to share the FRC's guidance around that if you've not seen that information. But there is an expectation across the system and across the sector that over the next few years we will get to a place where we are rebuilding the assurance across local government. So disclaimers are not going to be unusual over the next couple of years. We will see a process whereby we have to rebuild that assurance. So, for example, next year there will still be probably a disclaimer element because we'll have no assurance over the opening position because I haven't done any work over the 23-24 audit. So it will take a few years. But I think what's important for the committee to remember is that you are not alone. This is a system issue, and there are mechanisms in place which needs to happen. Now, some of this has been more drawn out, so I think if I remember the first time probably coming to speak to you, we had ambitions of this process being quicker. Clearly the general election slowed down some of the legislation that needed to happen for this to become through. We also didn't get the sort of formal guidance till recently in terms of the LARIGs as to what was to be expected around the work that we needed to do. So there's a lot of reasons why we are in this position. What I think we must focus on is making sure that 24-25 goes to plan, and Chris is by doing the accounts today, we can make sure we've got a good start for 24-25. We'll do the planning and the normal cycle, and therefore we should be able to start bringing back a normalised audit process. That doesn't mean that we'll have a normal audit opinion. That's going to take a while to get there, but will mean that in terms of what you see from us will be more normalised next year. Very importantly, I think actually beyond the set of accounts is the value for money work. So the value for money work is going to give you assurances around the processes and procedures and controls in place around financial sustainability, around governance, and around that sort of economy, efficiency and effectiveness. That will still be reported. So you'll have that by February, as long as we can get that work concluded. And then there will be a requirement to report that through in November every year. So that, which is actually in some ways, a more important aspect in terms of actually understanding the mechanisms through which you are being able to operate as an authority, will be coming through more frequently. And that is what you haven't had in terms of VFM reporting for a number of years, whereas that will become much more normal. So that's why, and in terms of your second question as to the wording of the disclaimers, we are still working on what they will look like. So once I've got some clarity over that, I can share with the committee as that comes through. But you will see, I suppose, what will be the disclaimers coming through from BDO in the near future. Expect them to be relatively broad, is what I would say.
Thank you. Really helpful, Emma. Councillor Sunnucks?
Yes. I mean, it's really scary being on an audit committee of an organisation that hasn't had an audit report since 2020. It's really scary. So if we could narrow down those disclaimers, we could be sure, for example, that the books and accounts, the record keeping is working, that the accounts are connected to the records, all the interim stuff you could perhaps have done already. If we could be sure that if there must be, if you could tell us that this year's transactions are sound and that your disclaimer just relates to the opening balances, that would be a reasonable thing to do. But I think it's really it's really scary, because I think there's, and I'll write to you separately, I think there's some really major areas here that need attention, and there's huge great adjustments and increasing each year between the statutory, the financial figures and what we're putting through our reserves. And if those were found to be wrong, there'll be all sorts of consequences to look at. So I really feel quite discomforted, but I was hoping that by 28th of February we'd have an audit opinion, and it sounds for sure as if we're not going to.
Okay, thank you, William. I mean, I think Emma's already explained what the situation is. I'll just remind members that we also have a meeting planned with BDO, where we'll also be able to ask some of those questions in camera and check some of those things in a week's time. Richard?
Yeah, mine was just more of a general comment. Obviously, Emma is really keen to be able to get the finance team's focus. If members could just be mindful of that in terms of other requests on them over the coming weeks, that would be really useful, because I think Emma really does need the focus of them. But when they're diverted for other reasons, that removes the focus, and it will get in the way of us being able to even deliver what Emma wants to. Thanks.
Thank you, Richard. Councillor Smith.
Thank you. I would echo those remarks, and also thank Emma for the presentation that she's given here today. It gives me a lot more confidence than we've had from auditors for many years. I note also that today the National Audit Office has refused to sign off the government accounts and is effectively disclaiming those because of the issues with local authority and police and fire commission accounts and what have you. So it shows that this is a national issue. There's a very interesting graph showing the number of councils that haven't produced reports, and it would appear from this that the majority of councils have not yet produced their 2020 accounts, which means that we're slightly better than average, but that's still not very good. So thank you very much, and I would also certainly echo the remarks that Richard's made about we have to be mindful of other requests on the finance team at this time for more detailed breakdowns of these figures or that figures or what have you, because I think we've got other priorities that we have to get these reports out.
Thank you, Councillor Smith. Yeah, certainly amongst the local authorities that were attending the audit chairs meeting last week, there was one council where the last audited accounts they'd had were 2018. We're in a better position than some others are, but you're quite right. This is a national issue. We've been aware that it's a national issue for the last 3 years, if not longer. Right. I'm just thinking. So we've agreed the amended note. Yep. So we've dealt with that. Item 9 finished with. We move on to item 10, the external audit progress, and that's just more or less what we've been discussing, Chris. But is there anything else that you want to add?
Not much, Chair. I think most of it's already been said, but I mean, just to sort of illustrate what we're up against at the moment, we've got the 4 financial year sets of accounts outstanding at Colchester alone, and in the context of shared services, we've got another 3 at Epping for good measure, making 7, and also 4 sets of external auditors. So, as well as 2 budgets. So, yeah, I mean, there is a batting order, and we can't please all of the people all of the time immediately, but we'll get to each and every one of them in chronological order, if you like.
Thank you. Yeah, and I think just following up from Richard's remarks as supported by Councillor Smith, I am aware that there are continuing, ongoing resource issues with the finance so we need to be mindful of that as well. Right, item 10, I think we've dealt with. Item 11, the work programme, Mr Evans.
Thanks, Chair. The only thing that I would draw the committee's attention to for this item is that obviously we've got the meeting with BDO before our formal meeting next week, 3rd of December, and 2 items have been removed from the agenda for the 17th of December formally, which is the Equality Annual Update and the Safeguarding Annual Update. They will go to different committees or in a different form. We're due to consider the results of the skills gap analysis questionnaire that you have all completed. And might it be possible that we do that prior to the start of the meeting on 17th of December? We'd said in the past in committee we'd have an informal discussion.
Yep, I'd already had this chat with Mr Evans before the meeting, and I was rather optimistic we could fit PMG in then as well, but that's not proved possible. So my suggestion would be for an agreement that we start the meeting at 5:30, where we have our in-camera discussion around the skills audit, and then try to keep that to half an hour so that we can kick the formal meeting, the public meeting, at 6 o'clock. If we overlap a little bit because it's the first time we've done it, then so be it. Happy with that?
I think so. As long as Mr Evans could revise the calendar so we all remember, because we rely on it. Thank you.
Can we ask you to do that, Matt? Thank you. Okay. Right. Councillor Sunnox.
Yes, we need to look at the CCHL accounts sometime. We had their governance review and no accounts.
Will they be ready for the 17th? Right.
Not Emma's or Chris's responsibility.
No, I know.
We just need to make sure it's on the programme.
Well, if I can ask you then, Matt, to go away and just check, and if they are ready, then we could possibly fit those into the agenda on the 17th.
We potentially could, but I have been in contact with CCHL about this, and the accounts are not ready as yet. I don't know the reasoning for that. They're waiting to be signed off. I understand it, but what that means, I don't know. But we are aware that they need to come back. And sorry, also I should have mentioned that at the previous meeting you requested an update on the review of CCHL governance and the action plan that was agreed, and that work is currently being undertaken. I spoke with the monitoring officer today, and that will be coming back to committee in the new year. So just a bit of assurance that has been picked up as well.
Okay,
I'd forgotten about that.
I'll leave you to liaise, but I'll also take it upon myself to liaise with the chair of CCHL as well and just check, as he is a colleague ward member. Right, I think that's it then. We just need to approve the work programme going forward, subject to the amendments that we've discussed this evening and the potential for including another item on the 17th of December. All right? Yeah, agreed? Thank you. Right, in that case, I think we are done. Thank you all for your attendance and participation this evening. Good night.